لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. All praise is due to Allah, and after that all praise is due to Allah. We thank Him, we seek help from Him, we ask guidance in Him, and we seek forgiveness in Him from our own evils and from our own bad deeds. Anyone who has been guided by Allah, they are indeed guided, and anyone who has been misguided by Allah, you will never find a guardian to guide them. I bear witness. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except for Allah, the only one, without partner. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a servant and his messenger. To proceed forward. So alhamdulillah, it's good to be back after a long time. I've been traveling. And I wanted to start off in the khutbah and really talk about this idea of travel just for a bit, because it really it gives me a good segue to talk about what I'm going to talk about in the khutbah. And that is, when I was traveling, and this is human nature for us to do that, so wherever I was going, I would always relate whatever I was seeing back to something that was happening at home. So for example, and this time might happen to you, maybe when I was in Dubai and I was looking at the Burj Khalifa, I was like, oh, that has some similarities to the Petronas Towers. Or you go to a mall, you say, oh, that looks a little bit like the LCC or Pavilion. You go to a park and you say, oh, that looks like the park next to my house. And so that reference point that you always have, that goes back to something that's near, dear to you, but also something that you're very, very familiar with. That's the reference point that you always make. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the same thing should be happening to us in our everyday life as we're relating things that are happening to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Messenger, and Islam. That whatever we see within our lives that are happening, we should be so familiar, so comfortable, so understanding of our religion that we relate back to it at all times. Whatever's happening within your life. And so it's with this type of this segue that I wanted to talk about one particular craze that has happened over the past week and a half. And I'm guilty of that craze too. So I want to be clear about that. But it is something that I think it's important for us to be able to talk about as well. And this having to be a craze is not necessarily a bad thing. As long as you are able to reflect upon it, you're able to, and through that reflection, you're able to remember Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This craze is not other than the release of The Last Jedi that happened last week. And as many as are aware, I've actually spoken about khutbah, given a khutbah before, on the entire Star Wars universe. I've spoken about the various arcs and the storylines and the story and how they relate to Islam. And the point of why is basically twofold. Why I do this is for two reasons. And the first reason is most likely you're going to go watch the film. And you're going to watch it anyway. So the question becomes, rather than just sitting there and watching it and just for the pure pleasure of enjoying it, which is fine, but just for the pure pleasure of enjoying it, why not try to benefit from it? And if you can relate that back, as I mentioned earlier, if you can relate that back to something in Islam, something in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wouldn't that be just a much more enjoyable and pleasurable experience? So that's the first reason why. The second reason why is if you have no interest in it whatsoever, then you're in luck because there will be a lot of spoilers in this khutbah. If you have no interest in it whatsoever, I can almost guarantee you that your kids probably will watch it. And if they do, then I recommend that you watch it with them. Because there's a point of relation that you have then with your kids as well. That you're able to speak to them and also experience with them the same kind of things they're experiencing, but then also, because they might be too young, you're relating them, whatever you saw in the movie back to Islam, Allah, and the Messenger. Right? So that's the reason why we would be able to do that. And if you humor me for a bit, I just want to mention, that in Star Wars, just to kind of set the stage, in the Star Wars universe, there are these people called the Jedi who are known to be the keepers of the Force by keeping a balance between good and evil, the light and the dark side. And it's also a story about falling from grace and redemption. It's being good, becoming bad, and then also at the end of the day, becoming good again. So falling from grace and redemption. And if you want to learn more, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but if you want to learn more, you can always go back and watch the previous khutbahs that are available. In this khutbah, what I want to focus on are a few aspects of the movie, The Last Jedi, and what lessons we can learn from them. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I remember the hadith related or narrated by Abu Hurairah, and that the Prophet ﷺ said, the wisdom is the property of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he should lay claim to it. Wherever he finds that wisdom, he should lay claim. And I, for one, believe there's a lot of wisdom, not only in the entire Star Wars universe, but also particularly in this movie itself. Now, I know it's already been a week and a half, and there are going to be spoilers in this, so for those of you that are eager to watch it, maybe this weekend or something, I want to apologize in advance, but if you're not really a big fan, you probably should have seen it 3 times already. Okay, so in the movie, excuse me. So in the movie, there's a character named Rey, and she comes to Luke Skywalker, who is basically leaving, and he's left pretty much everybody, and he's living the life in seclusion. And she goes to Luke, and she's trying to convince him to come back into the real world, of the real galaxy, and help to fight the resistance against what's called the First Order. Right? Just kind of set the stage here a little bit. So she's trying to do that. And she also wants Luke to teach her place in the world. And what this means basically is that she has a strong force within her, and she wants to be able to be taught by one of the masters, which is the Jedi Master, Luke Skywalker. And so there's 2 lessons that I wanted to kind of leave you with in this particular interaction that happens for a big part of the movie between Rey and Luke as well. Number 1. So Rey is under the impression amongst a lot of other people that Luke has to pass on the Force, or the ways of the Force, because he is the last of the Jedi. That means that, and if he dies, then the Force dies with him. Everything that we know about the Force actually is going to die with him. And so Luke's response to this is very, very interesting, because he basically responds back and he says, the Force does not belong to the Jedi, and to say that if the Jedi die, the light dies, is vanity. Right? When Luke says this, the first thing that came to my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more I kind of confirmed it, right? My thoughts went straight to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with Him as Muslims. Because a lot of us as Muslims think that we are the sole possessors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That without us being and worshipping on this world, that nothing, everything would go to quote-unquote hell in a handbasket. And that is not the case. And that to us, looking at it from the same perspective that Luke was telling Rey, is vanity for us. To think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dependent upon us being worshippers of Him. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Quran actually mentions, He says Allah is Ghani an al-Alameen. He is the one who is independent of the worlds. In another verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, antumul fuqara, wallahu ghani wa hamid. That He is the one that, He says, oh mankind, you are the ones who are poor, meaning poor, usually the poor means you are in need, and Allah is the one free of all need, independent and worthy of all praise. Right? And this is the relationship that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we didn't exist as Muslims, if there was no Muslims left in the world today to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's perfectly okay. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent of our being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent of our worship. Right? He is awwalu wal akhiru. He is the first and He's the last. That means He was there before us and He's going to be there long after us. So we are insignificant. To say that we have a relationship with Allah, which is a dependency relationship, that means that Allah is dependent upon us, that is vanity. That is hubris. And so we have to keep this in mind. Number 2. Luke also says in one of the lessons that he's giving to Rey, he says that the Jedi were romanticized, deified. If you strip away their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure, hypocrisy, and hubris. At the height of power, the Jedi lost their way. That was what Luke told Rey. And I thought to myself, how is this any different than if we look at it now versus the Muslim empire that existed however many hundreds of years ago? We are all too quick to look back at our glory days of the Islamic Empire and romanticize about it, right? Where we deify some of the people that were alive during that time, whether it be in any different methodology, but we deify a lot of people in this area as well. We romanticize their greatness, and what legacy, we have to ask ourselves, what legacy did they leave behind? At the height of their power, it was their hubris that brought them down. It was their arrogance that brought them down. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that told them that this is not the way of Islam. And so that is what actually brought them down. And we are their legacy. We as an ummah are the legacy of the people that came before us. And if we are the legacy, look around us and you can basically tell that whatever was left for us was a failure, because they weren't able to teach us or do anything for us that we could benefit from. If you look around the Muslim world, that's what you actually see. So the downfall of our Muslim empire is because of hypocrisy and hubris, and our legacy is no different than that as well. And so that was the second lesson that I wanted to mention as well. Now, in another part of the film, Luke is thinking about his failure to teach Ben Solo and allowing him to go to the dark side of the Force. If you don't remember the last movie, you probably won't understand, but I hope you do. Now, there's a dialogue that happens, now this is the real spoiler, so there's a dialogue that happens between Yoda and Luke Skywalker in the actual film. Okay? And in this dialogue, Yoda, being the one who is ultimately much more wiser than Luke, actually says, he tells him, pass on what you've learned. Strength, mastery, and then he says, but weakness, folly, failure. Yes, failure, most of all. The greatest teacher, failure is. The greatest teacher, failure is. That is the true burden of all masters. Right? And he goes on to tell Luke, he says, we are what they grow beyond. We are what they grow beyond, and that is the true burden of all masters. Now I want to focus on this aspect of we are what they grow beyond. If you're in a relationship between the teacher and the student, right, the ultimate of that teacher teaching that student is not that the student becomes equal to the teacher. It's how much farther he goes than the teacher was able to teach him. And that's how you realize the greatness of that teacher. That he goes way beyond, over and above whatever that teacher's knowledge was. That student is able to not only meet it, but exceed it. And that is the true nature of teaching. And in listening to Yoda speak to Luke again about teachers, reminded me of the greatest teacher that we have, which is in our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are what they grow beyond. That is the true burden of all masters. And from this perspective, if we look at the students of the Prophet ﷺ and those who are none other than the companions, right? The companions, who can argue that the Prophet wasn't the greatest of masters? Who can argue that he wasn't the greatest of masters? Because within one generation, right, you took basically a ragtag group of people. A ragtag people were Arabs who had a system of justice that nobody else understood. Nobody wanted to conquer them, that they thought this was a lost land. Within one generation, they were able to conquer two of the world's biggest empires. This is not a joke. This is taking a small band of people and telling them, you, 12 people, 15 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. You're going to go and you're going to challenge the world. And not only are you going to challenge them, but you're going to be able to defeat them. The Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire. And that's how you know that our Master Muhammad ﷺ was the greatest of masters. Because he was able to take those people that were living in Jahiliyyah, that didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one, that had a code of justice that was fair on some things, but mostly unfair on other things. He basically was able to take them, transform them, not only make them equal, because the equal would have been that they stayed within the Arabian Peninsula and they were able to find with the religion that they had. But not only did he do that, but he gave them that message. The Battle of Tabuk, when he took them up to the Roman Empire, and there was a battle that was there, that was a testing ground for what the Muslims could actually accomplish. And so after he died, he had already an army waiting, led by Osama bin Zayd. And so when they went up, they were able to do whatever it is the Prophet ﷺ left for them to be able to conquer. And so that in us is the example of what it is to be that greatest of teachers. So for us, as we're teaching our children, our legacy is not for our children to do what we're doing. Our legacy is for our children to do and go beyond whatever it is that we've done. And if we can do that, then we've succeeded. If we can't do that, then the world stays in a static state. If the entire goal of our civilization, the entire goal of us as parents is to make our kids like us, where is the progress? They have to be better Muslims, they have to be better mu'mins, they have to be better scholars, they have to be better teachers, engineers, doctors, whatever it is. They have to be better than us. And that is the legacy of teachers, and that is the burden that all masters have to be able to have. And yes, he was only a messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, he says Muhammad is only a messenger. Many were the messengers that passed away before him. Many were the messengers that passed away before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yes, he was only a messenger, but he was the Sayyid of the messengers. He was the master of all of the messengers. How do we know this? Because of all the messengers that came down, how many of them did what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to do? For example, if you have Isa alayhi salam, right? After he passed away, was there an army that went and challenged the entire world and defeated them? Take Musa alayhi salam. Was there an army that did that? Take any of the prophets, Shu'aib, Idris, all of these other people, for majority of them, not all, the majority of them, they basically had to run away and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed that city. So they were a small band of people and then they basically passed on from generation to generation. This, the Prophet's legacy, subhanAllah, the Prophet's legacy sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that he made his students, he made the companions go way above and beyond anything that he had done in that Arabian Peninsula. And so we are the legacy of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 1 billion strong and growing. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who reference everything in life according to Islam, the Quran, and the Sunnah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولكم واستغفر. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. So, as I mentioned to you, we've been discussing about the last Jedi in the context of Islam. The more important than the actual movie itself, as I mentioned this in the very, very beginning, is how we begin to, within our everyday life, how we begin to reference everything that goes on around us according to Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran, and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sunnah. And when we begin to do that, then you know that we've reached a state that Islam is something that is embedded in us and life revolves around it. Not that life is embedded with us and Islam has to revolve around it. When you begin to reference everything according to Islam, then you realize that you regulate your life according to the prayers. Not that the prayers are regulated according to your life. You see the difference between the two? If I have a meeting at 2 o'clock, and I know it's time for Jummah prayer, you're going to say, well, I have a meeting at 3, I can do Jummah roughly, quickly, go rush back to the office, I can do all of those things. The other way to look at it is say, no, I'm not going to have a meeting between 1 and 3 o'clock, right? This is my Jummah time, this is my Dhuhr time, my Maghrib time, whatever it is. These are times that I'm not going to be able. If we're talking about it from the context of a movie, and I teach this to all the time as well, if a movie is going for 3 hours, likely one of the prayers you're going to miss. Right? So you have to basically pick a time of the movie that you're not going to miss your salah. If you pick 6 o'clock as your salah, you're going to miss your Maghrib prayer. If you pick your time at 5 o'clock, you're probably going to do it. So you have to be able to fix your time even to watch The Last Jedi, which is probably one of the longest in the Star Wars series. You're going to have to pick a time to watch The Last Jedi according to when you prayed before, and you would still have time to be able to pray after. This is what I mean when I say that you have to be able to live, regulate your life around Islam, not Islam around your life. So we discussed in the first khutbah, as I was mentioning, that Allah is independent of His creation, that He doesn't need us, that we need Him. Because as I mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He is Ghani anil alameen. He is the one who is independent above all of the worlds. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I mentioned earlier, said, O mankind, you are poor, and Allah is independent, worthy of all praise. And also, the second lesson was that we didn't idolize and deify the past when it comes to the Islamic Empire. How large it was, how strong it was, how they never did anything wrong, and we're doing everything wrong today, and all of these different types of things. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that we are the legacy of that empire. And if we consider ourselves failure, then they failed as well. Because at the same time, our children are the legacy of us. Right? That's how you have to be able to relate things. So, at the height of the Muslim Empire, there was hypocrisy, there was hubris, arrogance, that led to the downfall, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never allow an arrogant race to be able to survive. Because that's one of the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is greater. And we should never be challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that type of greatness as well. And another idea that I wanted to discuss about the film, right, is you basically, in the entire universe of Star Wars, but particularly also in this one, you have basically a small ragtag group of people. They call them the Rebellion. And they're going against either before it was the Empire, or now it's the First Order. But they're basically going up against the largest, the most powerful empire known in the galaxy. But this is a small group of people. But one of the things that they say in the movie over and over again, I just want to highlight at this point, is that they say, we are the spark that lights the fire that burns down the rebellion, or that burns down the First Order. We are the spark that lights the fire that burns down the First Order. Now, I wanted to focus on this particular aspect of this idea of a spark. This idea of a spark. Because throughout, this is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there's always a small group of people that are going to be able to light that spark that brings down everything. Right? I'll give you one example of the Quran, and obviously we have the example of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of a resistance in the story of Saul and Dawood, and so David and Goliath, basically. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, He says, when Saul went forth with the soldiers, he said, indeed, Allah will be testing you with a river. So whoever drinks from it is not of me, and whoever does not taste it is indeed of me, excepting those who take some from in the hollow of their hand. But they drank from it, except for a very few of them. Okay, now this is the part I want to focus on, because I needed to give you a background of what this was. Then we had crossed. When we had crossed it, along with those who believed with him, they said, the majority of people said, they said, there is no power for us today against Goliath and his soldiers. Think of Goliath as the First Order. There is no power today for us against Goliath and his soldiers. Against the First Order, we have no power. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, but those who were certain that they would meet Allah, they said, how many a small company has overcome a large company by permission of Allah, and Allah is with those who are patient. How many a small company has overcome a large company by the permission of Allah. The small company is the spark that grows the fire that brings down empires. And this is one of the greatest lessons that we have. Never think to yourself that if you have an idea that it can't change the world. Never think that if you are a small group of people that you can influence the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning His sunnah in the Quran. That this is the nature, and if you look at any revolution that you're thinking about, whether you look at the South African anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement, anything along those lines, even if you look at the Malay independence, it wasn't the entire population of Malaysia that was behind it. There were a lot of people that were working for the British. It was not the entire population, but there was a small group of people that decided that this was wrong, and we needed to have our own Muslim nation. And they did it. And they were able to do it. Why? Because of what Allah says, how many a small company has overcome a large company by the permission of Allah. And don't ever underestimate that. At the time, the British Empire was the largest and greatest empire in the world. There was a saying about the British Empire that said that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And so whether it be in India or Malaysia or anywhere else, The small group of people were the ones who sparked the fire amongst everybody else that brought down the empire, and now look at that empire today. Just look at that empire today. And if you look at, I know I get excited when I talk about Star Wars and going a little bit over, but just give me some time. I'll finish with one last point, and I'll be over it, inshallah. And so if you look at all revolutions, this is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says also in the Quran about the Prophet, he says, Ya ayyuhan nabi, O Prophet, urge the believers to battle. Right? He says if there are 20 who are steadfast, they will overcome 200. And if there are 100 who are steadfast, they will overcome 1,000 of those who have disbelieved, because they are people who do not understand. Right? Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that 200 can take over, 20 can take 200, 100 can take over 1,000. It's a small group, as long as we are steadfast in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as we are steadfast in our belief in Allah and what is the sunnah of Allah and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do, not what we can do, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make happen, then we can go out there and we can change the world. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. Now we go through our lives. The last thing that I wanted to mention finally is we have come to the overall story of Luke Skywalker. And he grew up without parents. He learned that his father, he learned about his father being somebody who was like the greatest evil character in the entire Star Wars universe, and the most powerful also. He was able to bring him back from the dark side to the light side, only to basically train another pupil and make him go from the light side to the dark side. You see the conflict that's happening here from the light side. He was not able to train Rey into having the Force, and he lived in seclusion because he was torn inside. He was broken, and without a reason. He had no reason to live. He was basically going to spend his days as an ascetic and die that way. But without giving, I don't want to give too much away, but in the end, right, Rey says about Luke, she said that he dies in peace and purpose. He dies with peace and purpose. Now I want to focus on this aspect, because we go through our lives in the same state of turmoil. Right? We have our ups, we have our downs, we have our happiness, we have our sorrows, we have our victories, we have our defeats, we have all of these different things. And the idea is not how we live within those mediums, but how we actually end up at the end. What do we do at the end of our days that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be able to enter us into paradise? That is the most important aspect of our lives, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He accepts us into paradise, what does He ask us of? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, He says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَطَعَ اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. He says, except the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. That is the ultimate goal. That when we are facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, when we're about to die, because that's when for us our judgment begins, when we're about to die, we are at peace with whatever it is that we've done within our lives. No regrets. No regrets. And the only way to have no regrets is that you live your life in the example of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You live our lives, and if you do that, then you naturally will die with peace. And the purpose is what? You know who doesn't have purpose when they die? It's the atheist. Because he doesn't know what's going to happen afterwards. You know who dies with purpose? Somebody who knows that there is an akhirah, there's a Jannah, and because I live my life, inshallah, in a good way, according to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I did that with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have a purpose, I'm going to go to Jannah. That is my purpose. So I have peace because I'm doing it with a qalb salim, and I have purpose because I know with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to bring me into paradise. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentioned sound heart is a heart at peace. He says, Ya ayyuhal mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. Right? He says, O you soul at rest, at peace. Mutma'inna, itmina, means a soul that is at peace. Return to your Lord, pleased and pleasing. That we are pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us. And so when we die, we should be the ones that other people say about us, he died with peace and he died with purpose. He died with peace and he died with purpose. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who die with peace and purpose and with a qalb that is salim. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة